Hi, the name of this Blender video tutorial is FireParticles. This is part of a series of video tutorials that focus on common settings and techniques used in implementing Blender particle effects. The settings and techniques demonstrated here are by no means definitive. There are many different approaches to using Blender particles and thousands of individual settings. Use this tutorial as an introduction to further exploration of Blender particle effects. To demonstrate fire particles, I have modeled a simple campfire scene consisting of 3 logs surrounded by a number of rocks. The scene is lighted by a point lamp, colored red, and reduced to a small circle surrounding the rocks. I have set the timeline animation to 100 frames. I have modeled 2 circular objects to serve as particle emitters. These circular objects are filled with triangular faces. I have lowered the center vertex of each of these circle objects to form a bowl-like emitter object. I did this so that the initial flow of particles from the face normals will be slanted inward before moving upward, creating a bit more initial turbulence. I will select the first circle emitter object and go to the Particles editor, click on the plus sign, and add a new particle system. I'll leave the number of particles at 1000, set the start to -25 so that the particles are flowing at the beginning of the animation, and set the end to 100. I'll set the life to 25 so that particles are dying out during the animation. I'll set the random life to 0.75 so that most of the particles will die randomly. I'll set the distribution to random. In the velocity panel, I'll set the normal velocity to 6, which will make the particles move quite quickly. In the physics panel, I'll set the Brownian controller to 2, which will give the particles a bit of turbulence. In the render panel, I will uncheck Render the Emitter Object. I want to add some child particles to this system. In the Children panel, I'll select Simple. And I'll set the display and the render to 3. I'll set the roundness to 1. This will add child particles to the original particles. Now I could have just raised the number of particles to 3000, but by adding child particles instead, I can take advantage of one of the offset kink systems. I will select Wave, which will cause the child particles to move in a wave-like fashion. In the Field Weights panel, I will set the gravity to 0 so that the particles are not affected by gravity. I'll press the play button. The particles move quickly up in a somewhat turbulent fashion and die out rather quickly. I'll stop the animation and go back to frame number 1. I'll then select the second circle emitter object and go to the Particles editor and click on the plus sign and add a new particle system. Now I want the settings for this emitter to be exactly the same as the settings for the first emitter. To do this, I'll click on the Browse Systems button to the left of the settings name and select the existing particle system. The 2 emitter objects now have the same particle system settings. I'll select the Circle Emitter 1 object and go to the Materials editor and add a new material. I'll name this material Fire 1. Under Type, I'll select Halo. I'll set the alpha transparency to 0.2, which is very transparent. I'll click on the Diffuse Color swatch and set the color to a bright yellow, red and green to 0.5, and blue to 0. I'll set the halo size to 0.7 and the hardness to 50. I'll set the Add controller to 0.5. This will heighten the color where 2 or more particles overlap one another. In the options checkboxes, I will checkmark texture because I'll be adding a texture, extreme alpha, which will heighten the alpha settings, and soft, which will soften the halo edges a bit. I'll then go to the texture panel and add a new texture. I'll name it Fire 1 Texture. Under Type, I will select Distorted Noise. In the Influence panel, I will set the texture influence to 0.5, and I'll change the RGB to intensity color to red. Red at 1, green and blue to 0. I'll then select the second circle emitter object. I'll go to the Materials Editor and add a new material. I'll name this material Fire 2. Under the type, I'll select Halo. I'll set the alpha transparency to 0.7, and I'll click on the diffuse color swatch and set the color to a dark red. Red at 0.26, blue and green at 0. I'll set the halo size to 0.6 and the hardness to 50. I'll set Add to 0.5. In the options, I'll checkmark Extreme Alpha and Soft. I will not add a texture to this material. I'll go to frame number 60 and render the scene. The particle settings display a fire-like effect. Here is a video of a 100-frame rendering of this scene using these settings. These settings are a good jumping-off point for further exploration of Blender FireParticles.